A billionaire opens his door on a stormy night, and standing there is a young woman he's never seen before, or so he thinks. She looks him straight in the eyes and says, "I came to marry you, and give you sons." He laughs until she reveals a secret that shatters his world. 20 years ago, he saved a dying orphan from a burning building, and that same girl has come back, believing God sent her to heal his broken heart. But as whispers spread and old enemies rise, his empire begins to crumble, and the world turns against her, calling her a liar, a fraud, maybe even something worse. Who is she really? An angel sent to redeem him, or a ghost from his past that could destroy everything he has left? When love, faith, and fate collide, will one man's greatest act of mercy become the miracle that saves them both, or the sin that ruins them forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The wind howled against the tall windows of Archer Manor, its fierce gusts driving sheets of rain across the dark Maine coastline. Inside, Roman Archer sat in his leather chair, watching lightning illuminate the turbulent ocean below. The soft glow of a table lamp cast shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the silver at his temples and the deep lines around his eyes. A framed photograph on the mahogany side table caught his attention, a smiling woman with honey blonde hair holding a young boy. Roman's throat tightened as he reached out to touch the glass, his fingers tracing their faces. 20 years, he whispered. The words hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sound of thunder rolling across the water. The mansion's spacious rooms felt emptier than usual tonight. Roman had grown used to the solitude over the past 2 decades, filling his days with work and his charitable foundation. But something about this storm stirred up memories he'd rather forget, especially that night, the night of the fire at St. Mary's Convent. He could still smell the smoke, feel the heat of the flames. Roman shook his head, pushing the thought away. He'd done what anyone would have done. Running into that burning building wasn't heroic, it was human instinct. The image of the small girl he'd carried out had haunted him for years, another reminder of the child he couldn't save. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the mansion into darkness. Roman sighed, reaching for his phone to use as a flashlight. The backup generator should have kicked in automatically. He'd need to check the circuit breaker by the main gate. Grabbing an umbrella from the stand near the door, Roman stepped out onto the covered portico. The rain was coming down in heavy sheets now, reducing visibility to just a few feet. He squinted through the darkness, trying to make out the path to the gate. That's when he saw her. A figure stood at the bottom of the steps, completely still, despite the raging storm. As lightning flashed again, Roman caught a glimpse of a young woman in a simple white dress, now soaked through. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her feet were bare against the wet stone. Roman's heart pounded in his chest. "Who are you? How did you get past the gate?" The woman looked up at him, her eyes bright even in the darkness. Slowly she climbed the steps until she stood before him. Water dripped from her clothes, forming small puddles at her feet. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear above the storm. "You saved me once," she said, clasping her hands together as if in prayer. "I came to marry you." Roman stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. "I don't understand. Who are you?" "My name is Leah Cruz." She took another step forward, and lightning illuminated her face again. There was something in her expression, a mix of hope and certainty that made Roman's chest tighten. 20 years ago you carried me out of St. Mary's Convent when it burned. I've spent all this time looking for you." The umbrella slipped from Roman's grip, clattering against the stone floor. The memory he'd been trying to suppress all evening came rushing back, the screaming, the heat, the tiny body in his arms. Could this young woman really be that same child? "That's impossible," he whispered, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. There was something about her eyes, something that stirred a distant memory. "Nothing is impossible with faith," Leah said simply. She was shivering now, her bare arms covered in goosebumps. "The sisters who raised me told me what you did that night, how you risked your life to save mine. They said God must have had a purpose for keeping me alive." Roman found himself stepping back, his mind reeling. "And you think that purpose is marriage?" Leah nodded, water dripping from her chin. "I've prayed about this every day since I learned your name. I know it sounds crazy, but I believe with all my heart that this is why I was saved. To help heal your heart, to bring love back into this house." A gust of wind drove more rain onto the portico, but neither of them moved. Roman studied her face, trying to reconcile the determined young woman before him with the scared child from his memories. "How do you know about my heart, about this house?" "The sisters told me everything they could find out about you after the fire, about your wife and son, about how you withdrew from the world." Leah's voice softened with compassion. "I've carried your story with me all these years, praying for you every night." Roman ran a hand through his grey hair, feeling overwhelmed. The practical, logical part of his mind, the part that had built his business empire, was telling him to call security, to have this clearly confused young woman removed from his property. But something else, something deeper, kept him rooted to the spot. "You need to come inside," he heard himself say. "You'll catch your death out here." Leah's face lit up with a smile that seemed to push back the darkness of the storm. "Thank you," she said simply, following him through the heavy wooden door. In the foyer, Roman found a flashlight in one of the drawers and handed Leah a thick blanket from the hall closet. She wrapped it around her shoulders, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the marble floor. "I'll make some tea," Roman said, more to fill the silence than anything else. The backup generator hummed to life, bringing the lights back on in a soft glow. As he led her toward the kitchen, Leah looked around with wonder at the photographs on the walls. She stopped in front of one showing Roman's wife and son at the beach, their faces bright with laughter. "Sarah and Timothy," she said softly. "I've prayed for them too." Roman nearly dropped the kettle he was filling. "How do you know their names?" "The sisters helped me learn everything about you," Leah explained, her voice gentle. "I wanted to understand the man who saved my life, to know what God was asking of me." Roman set the kettle down harder than he intended. "And you believe God is asking you to marry a man more than twice your age? A stranger?" "You're not a stranger," Leah said with such conviction that Roman had to look away. "You're the man who carried me through fire, the man who gave me a second chance at life. How could you be a stranger?" The kettle began to whistle, and Roman busied himself with preparing the tea, trying to sort through the tumult of emotions her words had stirred up. When he handed her a steaming cup, their fingers brushed briefly, and he was surprised by how warm her hands were despite her soaking clothes. "You need dry clothes," he said, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this situation was. "I can have my housekeeper bring you something in the morning. For tonight, you can stay in one of the guest rooms." Leah cradled the teacup in both hands, steam rising around her face. "You're very kind," she said, "but you should know. I'm not leaving. I know this seems strange, maybe even frightening to you, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. God saved me through you, and now He's sending me to save you." Roman felt a flutter of something in his chest. Fear. Hope. He couldn't tell. Save me from what? From loneliness, Leah answered simply. From the walls you've built around your heart. From the guilt you still carry about that night. Not just about me, but about Sarah and Timothy too. Roman set his own cup down with shaking hands. You don't know anything about that night. I know you blame yourself, Leah said softly. But you weren't meant to save them. You were meant to save me instead, and that's not something you should carry as a burden. It's a gift, God's way of showing you that love doesn't end. With loss, it just takes new forms. Roman stared at her. This strange young woman who spoke with such certainty about things he'd never discussed with anyone. The storm continued to rage outside, but in here, in this moment, everything felt still, as if the world was holding its breath. You need rest, he finally said, his voice rough. We can talk more in the morning. Leah nodded, setting down her empty cup. Thank you for letting me in, she said, and Roman knew she meant more than just opening the door. As he showed her to one of the guest rooms, Roman couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just shifted on its axis. Whether this was madness or miracle, he wasn't sure. But as he watched Leah disappear behind the heavy oak door, he realized that for the first time in 20 years, his house didn't feel quite so empty. As the last words left Leah's lips, her eyes suddenly rolled back and her knees buckled. Roman lunged forward, catching her before she hit the marble floor. Her skin felt cold and clammy against his hands. Mrs. Daly, he called out, his voice echoing through the dimly lit hallway. Mrs. Daly, come quickly. The sound of hurried footsteps preceded the appearance of his housekeeper, her grey hair slightly dishevelled from sleep. Good heavens, Mr. Archer, what on earth? She collapsed, Roman explained, lifting Leah's slight frame into his arms. She's soaked through. Mrs. Daly's initial shock quickly gave way to efficient action. Bring her to the blue guest room downstairs. I'll fetch some towels and dry clothes. As Roman carried Leah down the hallway, the backup generator hummed to life, flooding the house with warm light. In the better illumination, he could see how young she really was, probably no more than 30, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting exhaustion. The blue guest room, with its soft, queen-sized bed and ocean-themed decor, felt almost too fancy for this bedraggled stranger. Roman laid her gently on top of the covers just as Mrs. Daly bustled in, arms full of fluffy towels and what looked like her own nightgown. Out you go, Mr. Archer, Mrs. Daly commanded, shooing him towards the door. I'll take care of this poor child, though I expect a full explanation once she's settled. Roman waited in the hallway, pacing back and forth as muffled sounds of activity came from behind the closed door. His mind whirled with questions. How had she found him? What did she mean about marriage? And why did her words about that night at the convent stir such vivid memories? After what seemed like an eternity, Mrs. Daly emerged, closing the door softly behind her. She's sleeping now. Poor thing was absolutely exhausted. Care to tell me why a young woman showed up at our door in the middle of a storm? Roman led the way to the kitchen, where the tea kettle still waited. As he prepared fresh cups for them both, he explained what little he knew. Mrs. Daly listened with raised eyebrows, her hands wrapped around her steaming mug. She says I saved her life, Roman finished, from a fire at a convent. Mrs. Daly's eyes widened. The St. Mary's fire, that was you. Roman nodded slowly. I never talked about it. It was the same year as... Well, you know. I was driving home that night, saw the flames. I heard crying from inside. He trailed off, lost in the memory of smoke and terror, and a tiny hand reaching through the darkness. Well, Mrs. Daly said softly, that explains the newspaper clipping she was clutching in her hand. What newspaper clipping? It was in her pocket. soaked through, but you can still make out the photo. It's you, 20 years younger, standing in front of your old office building. She must have been keeping it all this time. A strange feeling settled in Roman's chest. He remembered that photo. It had been taken just months before the accident, before he'd lost everything that mattered. A soft sound from the doorway made them both turn. Leah stood there, swimming in Mrs. Daly's borrowed nightgown, her dark hair damp but combed. She looked steadier now, though still pale. "I'm sorry for frightening you," she said, her voice clearer than before. "I haven't eaten much today, and the bus ride was very long. Sit down this instant," Mrs. Daly commanded, already moving to the refrigerator. "I'll fix you something proper to eat." Leah sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her eyes finding Roman's. "I've imagined this moment for so many years," she said quietly. "Meeting you again. The sisters at St. Catherine's Convent helped me find you through your foundation's address in New York. I've been saving for the bus ticket for months." "St. Catherine's?" Roman asked. "Not St. Mary's?" "St. Mary's burned down," Leah explained, accepting a plate of reheated shepherd's pie from Mrs. Daly with a grateful smile. "The surviving sisters and children were taken in by St. Catherine's. That's where I grew up." As she ate, Leah told her story. How she'd been only 9 years old when the fire started. How she'd hidden in a closet, terrified, until a stranger's voice called out through the smoke. How that stranger, Roman, had carried her to safety. She described living at St. Catherine's, learning about faith and purpose from the sisters who raised her. "They helped me understand that God had a plan," she said, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. "That I was saved for a reason. When I was old enough, Sister Agnes helped me search for information about you. That's when we found the article." She reached into the pocket of the nightgown and pulled out a wet, worn piece of newspaper. Roman took it carefully. His younger self stared back at him, confident and unaware of how his world would shatter just months later. The headline read, "Tech Pioneer Roman Archer Opens New Headquarters." "I've carried it with me every day since I found it," Leah said softly. "The sisters thought I was too focused on the past, but I knew God was telling me something, that there was a purpose to our connection." Mrs. Daly, who had been quietly listening while preparing more tea, spoke up. "And you believe that purpose is marriage?" Leah's cheeks flushed slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I believe God preserved my life through Mr. Archer so that one day I could help heal his heart. The sisters taught me that sometimes God's plans seem strange to others, but they're clear to those who need to understand them." Roman stared at her, this young woman who spoke with such certainty about divine plans and purposes. Part of him wanted to dismiss it all as the fantasy of a troubled mind, but something in her quiet confidence gave him pause. "It's late," he said finally. "You should rest, whatever. We can discuss it in the morning." "Of course," Leah agreed, rising from her chair. "Thank you both for your kindness." Mrs. Daly insisted on escorting her back to the guest room, leaving Roman alone with his thoughts. He picked up the newspaper clipping again, studying his younger face. Had it really been 20 years? 20 years since he'd carried a small, frightened child from a burning building. 20 years since he'd lost his own child, his beloved Sarah. When Mrs. Daly returned, she found him still staring at the article. "She seems like a sweet girl," she said carefully. "Confused, perhaps, but sincere." "She can stay tonight," Roman replied, setting down the clipping. "It's not safe to send her out in this weather. Tomorrow we'll help her find her way back to the convent." Mrs. Daly nodded, but there was something knowing in her expression. "Of course, sir, though I suspect it won't be that simple." As Roman headed to his own room that night, He found himself pausing outside the blue guest room. No sound came from within. Leah must have fallen asleep. He thought of her words about divine purpose, about healing hearts. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where an ache he'd carried for 20 years pulsed with familiar pain. "Good night," he whispered to the closed door, then turned away, retreating to the safety of his solitude. But as he lay in his bed, listening to the storm gradually subsiding outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world had begun to shift, like the first tremors before an earthquake. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the mahogany dining table as Leah sat across from Roman. Her eyes kept drifting to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping view of the Maine coastline, where waves crashed against dark rocks in a never-ending dance. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," she breathed, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. The morning light caught the simple silver cross at her throat, making it shimmer. Roman watched her from behind his newspaper, struck by her unguarded wonder. She approached everything with such open appreciation, from Mrs. Daly's perfectly poached eggs to the antique china they were served on. "The view was what sold me on this property," he found himself saying. 25 years ago, when Sarah and I first—" He trailed off, surprised at how easily her name had slipped out. Leah's eyes softened with understanding. "Your wife had wonderful taste. This whole house feels like it was built for peace. You said something last night about serving me," Roman said, changing the subject. "What exactly did you mean by that?" Leah set down her fork, folding her hands in her lap. "God preserved my life through you. Now it's my turn to help restore what you've lost: peace, joy, purpose. The sisters taught me that true service is an act of love." Roman raised an eyebrow. "And you believe marriage is the way to accomplish this?" A gentle blush colored her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. "I believe God will show us the way, step by step. I'm here to serve however He leads." Something about her earnest conviction made Roman uncomfortable. He'd spent 20 years building walls around his grief, and here was this young woman, speaking so casually about restoration and divine purpose. "Well," he said finally, "if you're determined to stay, we should make this arrangement more appropriate. I could use a personal assistant, someone to help organize my charitable foundation's paperwork, maintain the house records. Mrs. Daly isn't as young as she used to be." "Oh, I'd love that." Leah's face lit up. "Sister Agnes made sure I learned office skills. I can type 60 words per minute, and I'm good with spreadsheets." Roman couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "There will be rules, of course. You'll have your own quarters in the East Wing, with a reasonable salary deposited directly to a bank account. We'll need to get you proper work clothes." "Mr. Archer," Mrs. Daly interrupted, appearing at his elbow with fresh coffee. "A word, if you please." In the kitchen, Mrs. Daly fixed him with a concerned look. "Sir, have you considered what people might say? A young woman living here, claiming divine guidance to marry you? The gossip alone could affect your foundation's reputation." Roman waved away her concerns. "She's clearly been through trauma. Once she settles into a normal routine, this marriage notion will fade. Besides, when was the last time I cared what people thought?" Mrs. Daly's expression suggested she wasn't convinced, but she nodded. "As you say, sir. I'll prepare the East Wing room." Later that morning, Roman found himself distracted from his work by the sound of quiet singing drifting from his study. He followed the melody to find Leah carefully dusting his bookshelves, her clear voice lifting in an old hymn he remembered from childhood. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Sunlight streamed through the windows she'd cleaned, making the room brighter than it had been in years. The familiar space felt different somehow, warmer, more alive. She'd arranged his desk with careful precision, sorted the scattered papers into neat stacks. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I can hire cleaning staff." Leah turned, duster in hand. "I want to. Every space deserves to be treated with love." That word again. Love. She used it so freely, without the weight of loss and regret that he'd carried for 2 decades. Throughout the day, Roman found himself drawn back to the study, watching as she transformed it from a cluttered sanctuary of solitude into an organized, welcoming space. She worked with quiet efficiency, humming hymns under her breath, her presence bringing a strange peace he couldn't quite explain. As evening approached, Leah's voice called out from upstairs. "Mr. Archer, I found something while cleaning." He followed her voice to his son's old room, a space he hadn't entered in years. She stood by the window, holding a violin case with careful reverence. "It was behind some boxes," she explained. "The strings need tuning, but otherwise it's in good condition." Roman's throat tightened. That was Michael's. He was just learning to play when... Leah opened the case, her fingers trailing gently over the polished wood. "May I? I studied violin at St. Catherine's." Before he could respond, she lifted the instrument to her shoulder, drawing the bow across the strings. The first few notes were tentative, adjusting for the years of disuse, but soon a melody emerged, clear and sweet in the dusty air. Roman sank into an old armchair, memories washing over him. Michael practicing scales, his small face scrunched in concentration. Sarah's laughter as their son produced particularly squeaky notes. The pride in his boy's eyes when he finally mastered "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." The music Leah played now was different, a Bach minuet that filled the room with gentle grace. As she played, tears slid silently down Roman's cheeks, but they didn't carry the usual bitter sting. Something else flowed with them, a sense of cleansing, as if the music was washing away layers of dust from his own heart. When the last note faded, neither of them spoke for a long moment. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, and somewhere in the distance, seabirds called to each other over the waves. Finally, Leah carefully placed the violin back in its case. "Music has a way of speaking what words can't," she said softly. "Thank you for letting me play it." Roman wiped his eyes, not trusting himself to speak. She seemed to understand, slipping quietly from the room with a gentle smile. He remained in the chair as darkness gathered, listening to the echoes of melody that seemed to linger in the air, wondering how this strange young woman had managed to unlock a door he'd kept sealed for so long. The coastal spring days settled into a gentle rhythm at Roman's estate. Morning light would find Leah in his home office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork from his charitable foundation. Her small hand sorted through years of neglected files, each document a window into Roman's past generosity. "You funded an entire wing for cancer research," she said one morning, wonder in her voice as she held up a faded document. "And here, scholarships for 50 underprivileged students." Roman glanced up from his laptop, a ghost of pride crossing his face. "That was a long time ago. But think of all the lives you changed." Leah carefully arranged the papers in chronological order. "Each act of kindness creates ripples we can't see." Her words stirred something in him, memories of a younger man who believed he could change the world, before grief had turned his philanthropy into distant transactions rather than personal involvement. One Wednesday morning, Roman found himself agreeing to visit the children's hospital in town, something he hadn't done in years. Usually he simply had his assistant wire the donations. But Leah's quiet insistence wore down his resistance. The hospital corridors were bright with murals of forests and ocean scenes. In the pediatric ward, children's artwork decorated the walls. Some kids were in wheelchairs, others trailing IV poles, but their faces lit up when they saw visitors. "Are you an angel?" a small girl with a pink headscarf asked Leah, reaching for her hand. Leah knelt beside the child's wheelchair. "No, sweetie, I'm just someone who wanted to meet you. What's your name?" "Sophie. I'm 7 years old." Soon other children gathered around them. They called her Angel Lady, drawn to her gentle presence. Leah listened to their stories, played simple games, and sang songs with them. Roman stood back, watching as she transformed the sterile hospital environment into something warmer, more hopeful. In the oncology wing, he met quietly with the hospital administrator, arranging to cover treatments for 3 families struggling with medical bills. It was something he'd done countless times before, but today felt different. The children's laughter echoing down the hall made the numbers on the checks feel more real, more meaningful. On the drive home, ocean waves crashed against the rocky shore, while clouds painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Leah sat quietly in the passenger seat, lost in thought. "You know," she finally said, "I believe kindness circles back through time. Every good deed creates a chain of love that keeps going, even when we can't see it anymore." Roman's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sarah had said almost the same thing 20 years ago when they'd first started the foundation. "Every act of kindness is eternal," she'd told him. "It becomes part of the fabric of the universe." That night, sleep eluded him. He paced the long hallways of his home, Sarah's voice mingling with Leah's in his mind. Their shared faith in the power of goodness unsettled him. He'd spent so long believing that faith was a luxury he could no longer afford. Dawn was breaking when he finally drifted, off only to be awakened by Mrs. Daly's knock at 9 o'clock. "Sir, there's been a delivery at the gate. A sealed envelope for Miss Cruz." Roman frowned. No one knew Leah was staying here. They'd been careful to avoid public attention, and she hadn't given anyone the address. In the kitchen, Leah sat at the wooden table, the morning sun streaming through windows she'd polished to sparkle. The envelope lay before her, plain white paper with her name typed in stark black letters. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Roman watched her face pale as she read the single line of text. Without a word, she handed him the paper. "If you stay with him, he'll lose everything again, just like before." The threat hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Leah's eyes met his, and he saw not fear, but a fierce determination that startled him. "I won't let anyone hurt you," she said quietly. "Not while I'm here. Leah, this could be dangerous. Maybe you should—" She cut him off with a gentle shake of her head. "I was saved for a reason. If protecting you is part of that purpose, then I accept it. Completely." Roman wanted to argue, to insist she think of her own safety first. But the unwavering certainty in her eyes reminded him of another woman who had faced down his protests with the same quiet strength. Instead of speaking, he simply nodded, watching as she carefully folded the threatening note and slipped it into her pocket. The morning sun continued to pour through the windows, turning Leah's dark hair to amber as she began preparing breakfast, humming softly as if to push back against the shadow that had tried to intrude on their peace. But Roman could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the extra care with which she moved, and knew that her resolve to stay had cost her something of her innocent trust in the world. Yet she kept humming, kept moving with grace through the kitchen that had become her domain, as if determined that love would win out over fear. And despite his own misgivings, Roman found himself hoping, for the first time in decades, that she might be right. Mrs. Daly bustled in with fresh coffee, her concerned gaze moving between them. The routine of the household continued, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of protective watchfulness, as if the very walls of the old house had absorbed Leah's silent vow and stood ready to guard its inhabitants against whatever darkness had sent that warning. The kitchen felt different that evening as Mrs. Daly served dinner. The usual warmth of shared meals had given way to an underlying tension that even the flickering candlelight couldn't soften. Leah pushed her roasted vegetables around her plate, the threatening letter weighing heavily in her pocket. Roman noticed her unusual quietness. The cheerful young woman who normally brightened their meals with gentle conversation now seemed lost in thought, her usual radiant smile dimmed by whatever troubled her mind. "Leah?" Roman's deep voice cut through the silence. "Is something wrong?" She looked up, meeting his concerned gaze. Her lips parted to answer, but before she could speak, a sharp ring pierced the air. Roman pulled his phone from his pocket, frowning at the screen. "James, it's rather late for—" His face darkened as he listened. "What do you mean?" "Leaked. That's impossible. The data was secured." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Check every system. I want to know how this happened." Leah watched as he strode toward his study, tension visible in every line of his body. She followed quietly, hovering in the doorway as he paced the room, phone pressed to his ear. 28%? His voice rose with barely contained fury. The stock dropped 28% in one day. Someone had to have orchestrated this. He ran a hand through his silver hair, features twisted with rage and confusion. "Find out who accessed those files. No one outside the executive team should have had clearance." Ending the call, he slammed the phone onto his desk. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Leah flinched, but didn't retreat. "I'd like to pray for you," she said softly. Roman let out a harsh laugh that held no humor. "Pray? While someone is systematically destroying everything I've built?" He turned to face her, eyes blazing. "Where was prayer when I lost my family? When Sarah and Tommy—" His voice broke, and he looked away. Leah stepped into the study, her presence as gentle as morning light. "God doesn't always prevent our storms, but he walks through them with us." Pretty words, Roman muttered, but the bitter edge had already begun to fade from his voice. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the quiet strength in her eyes. "Will you let me pray with you?" The fight seemed to drain from him. He sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his 55 years. After a long moment, he gave a slight nod. Leah's soft voice filled the study, carrying peace like a melody. "Lord, we come to you in this moment of trouble. Guide Roman's steps. Grant him wisdom to see clearly and strength to face whatever comes. Surround him with your protection." As she prayed, Roman felt something shift inside him. Not a dramatic change, but a subtle easing of the panic that had gripped him since James's call. Her words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, somehow making the impossible feel manageable. Hours later, unable to sleep, Roman wandered the darkened halls of his home. A faint light caught his attention. The door to the small chapel room stood slightly ajar. Sarah had insisted on including it in the house's design, though he hadn't stepped foot inside since her death. Leah knelt in the soft lamplight, her head bowed. Her whispered prayers carried clearly in the silence. "Please protect him, Lord. Whatever this threat may be, don't let him face it alone. Use me as you will to help him." Roman stood frozen in the doorway, something breaking and mending simultaneously in his chest. The girl he'd pulled from flames 2 decades ago now knelt in his home, pleading for his protection with the same pure faith she'd shown as a child. He waited until she finished, watching as she made the sign of the cross and rose gracefully to her feet. She showed no surprise at finding him there. "You should be sleeping," she said gently. "So should you." "I needed to talk to God about you." The simple honesty in her voice stripped away his usual defenses. They stood in comfortable silence as the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky outside the chapel's window. Roman realized that in the 24 hours since that threatening letter arrived, this young woman had managed what he couldn't do in 20 years. She'd kept him from drowning in despair. "Leah." His voice was rough with emotion. "Don't leave." She turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I won't. I promise." In that moment, standing in the chapel his wife had loved, Roman felt something new taking root, a bond formed not of obligation or guilt, but of shared faith in the possibility of redemption. The girl he'd saved had become his anchor in a storm he never saw coming. The sun continued its slow rise, painting the chapel in shades of gold and rose. Neither moved to leave, content to share this moment of quiet understanding as the world outside began to wake. The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds as Roman reviewed the latest headlines on his tablet. "Foundation under fire. Archer Corp faces growing scrutiny." He sighed, rubbing his temples. Leah set a steaming cup of coffee beside him. "Sometimes the best way forward is to do more good, not less. The board wants me to lay low until this blows over." Roman took a sip of coffee, surprised by its perfect strength. Even Mrs. Daly hadn't mastered his preference so quickly. "What if we did the opposite?" Leah pulled out a chair, her eyes bright with purpose. "What if we showed people the heart behind the foundation?" Roman raised an eyebrow. "And how do you propose we do that?" "A hope home," she said simply. "For children like I was. Orphans who need more than just shelter. They need family." "An orphanage?" Roman set down his cup, studying her face. "That's a massive undertaking." "Not an orphanage, a home, where children aren't just housed but loved." Leah's voice grew passionate. "Your foundation already helps sick children. This would be healing of a different kind." Roman stood, pacing near the window. "The timing seems perfect." Leah finished. "What better way to heal your name than through good works?" He turned to face her, struck by the earnestness in her expression. "You really believe this could work?" "I know it will." She hesitated, then added softly, "I know the perfect location too." 2 hours later, their car pulled up to a chain-link fence surrounding an overgrown lot. Remnants of charred stone walls rose from the weeds, all that remained of St. Mary's Convent and Children's Home. Roman's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He hadn't been here since that night 20 years ago, when flames lit up the sky and a child's cry led him through smoke-filled corridors. Leah touched his arm gently. "We don't have to go in if it's too hard." "No." His voice was rough. "If you can face this, so can I." They walked through the rusty gate together. Leah's steps grew slower as they approached the ruins. Wild roses had claimed one crumbling wall, their pink blooms softening the fire's scars. "I remember the chapel was here," she whispered, touching a blackened cornerstone. "Sister Margaret would play the organ every morning." Her voice caught. Roman watched as she traced the stone with trembling fingers. "You remember that night?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Not everything. Mostly smoke and fear, and then—" She looked up at him. "Strong arms carrying me, a voice telling me to hold on tight. You saved my life." Roman swallowed hard. "I visited you once in the hospital. You were so small, wrapped in bandages. Why didn't you come back?" The question held no accusation, only gentle curiosity. He stared at the ruins, seeing not just the burned convent, but the wreck of his family's car, the hospital rooms, all the losses that had shaped his life. "I couldn't. After losing Sarah and Tommy, seeing you there, it was too much. I told myself you'd be better off without a broken man's interference." Leah wiped her eyes. God had other plans. They walked the perimeter of the property in companionable silence. Despite the devastation, the location was perfect, close to town but peaceful, with room for gardens and play areas. We could preserve part of the old chapel wall, Leah suggested, as a reminder that beauty can rise from ashes. Roman found himself nodding. The children could plant flowers along it. From her bag, Leah produced 2 white candles and a box of matches. I thought we might want these. They lit the candles, placing them in a broken window frame. The tiny flames danced in the growing dusk, defiant against the darkness. To new beginnings, Leah murmured. To hope, Roman added softly. The drive home was quiet, both lost in thought as rain began to fall. When they pulled into the garage, Roman turned to Leah before she could exit the car. Thank you, he said, his voice gentle in a way it hadn't been for years. For showing me that even the hardest memories can point the way forward. Leah's answering smile was like sunrise after a storm. That's what faith does. It helps us see light in the darkness. The rain intensified outside, but inside the garage, 2 people who had once been strangers sat in peaceful silence, bound by shared purpose and the quiet miracle of healing hearts. In just 1 week, they had moved from crisis to possibility, from defending the past to building the future. As Roman watched Leah gather her things, he realized that the foundation's reputation wasn't the only thing being rebuilt. Something in his own heart was under construction too, brick by careful brick, guided by the hands of the child he'd saved who had returned as a woman of remarkable faith. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, no longer a reminder of loneliness but a gentle accompaniment to newfound hope. Together they had taken the first steps toward turning tragedy into promise, and for the first time in 20 years, Roman felt truly awake to the possibilities ahead. Mrs. Daly was waiting with towels when they entered the house, clucking over their damp clothes. But even she fell silent at the peaceful expression on Roman's face, something she hadn't seen since long before Sarah and Tommy's deaths. Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes, she said softly, exchanging a knowing look with Leah. Roman nodded, heading toward his study. At the doorway, he paused. Leah? Yes? First thing tomorrow, let's start the paperwork for the Hope Home. His voice was firm, decided. It's time to build something new. Her answering smile confirmed what he already knew. They were on the right path, one that would transform not just a burned-out building, but perhaps their own lives as well. The rhythmic pounding of hammers filled the morning air as construction crews began work on the Hope Home. Yellow excavators carved neat foundations into the earth where the old convent once stood. Roman stood at the edge of the site, reviewing blueprints with the foreman, while Leah chatted with a group of local volunteers who had come to help clear debris. Camera shutters clicked nearby. 3 reporters from different newspapers huddled together, their lenses trained on Leah as she knelt to plant flowers along the preserved chapel wall. Her white sundress and genuine smile made for perfect photos, exactly the kind of heartwarming images that editors loved. "Miss Cruz," one reporter called out, "could we get a few shots of you and Mr. Archer together by the sign?" Roman suppressed a sigh, but walked over. These publicity moments had become routine over the past few weeks. Leah stood beside him, natural and at ease as always. The large sign behind them proclaimed, "Future site of the Hope Home, a Roman Archer Foundation project." "Mr. Archer, how does it feel to have such a young, passionate advocate bringing fresh energy to your charitable work?" another reporter asked, her pen poised over a notebook. Before Roman could answer, Leah spoke. "The Foundation's mission has always been about helping children. I'm just blessed to be part of continuing that legacy." Her diplomatic response impressed Roman. She had a way of redirecting attention to the cause itself, never seeking personal recognition. As the reporters scribbled notes, Roman noticed how Leah's presence had transformed these previously tedious media obligations into opportunities for genuine connection. Later that afternoon, in his office, Roman scrolled through his tablet, frowning at online news coverage. Beneath the positive headlines about the Hope Home project lurked uglier stories. Gossip sites buzzed with speculation about his relationship with Leah, each theory more sensational than the last. Gold digger, they called her. Trophy girlfriend. Young mistress. The words made his jaw clench. He had weathered plenty of media storms in his business career, but seeing Leah's name dragged through the mud stirred a protective anger he hadn't felt in years. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. Leah entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "We need to talk about these articles," Roman said, turning his tablet screen toward her. Leah set the tea down and glanced at the headlines without flinching. "I've seen them." "And they don't bother you?" She settled into the chair across from his desk. Truth never needs defending. Roman stared at her, struck again by her unshakable serenity. "But your reputation is in God's hands," she finished, "just like everything else." "You're too trusting," he said, running a hand through his grey hair. "The media can be brutal. They'll twist anything to create scandal." Leah sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Maybe, but getting angry only feeds their stories. The work we're doing matters more than gossip." Roman studied her face, so young, yet carrying wisdom beyond her years. Still, he couldn't shake his concern. The reporters were getting more aggressive, camping outside the gates some mornings. Leah deserved better than to be hounded like this. "I want you to take a few days off," he said finally. "The company has a cottage up the coast, private beach, excellent security. You could rest, avoid the cameras for a while." "Is that what you want, or what you think I need?" Her question was gentle but direct. "Both," Roman admitted. "Please, Leah, let me protect you from this circus, at least for a few days." She set down her teacup and folded her hands in her lap. "You're worried about me." "Of course I am." The words came out more forcefully than he intended. A soft smile touched her lips. "Then I'll go. Not because I need protecting, but because it matters to you." Relief flooded through him, though it was tinged with an emotion he wasn't ready to name. "Thank you. I'll have Mrs. Daly pack you some supplies." The next morning, Roman watched from his study window as Leah loaded her small suitcase into the waiting car. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair caught in the sea breeze. Before getting in, she turned and waved toward his window, somehow knowing he would be watching. As the car disappeared down the long driveway, the house seemed to grow larger and emptier around him. He tried to focus on work, but found himself distracted by the silence. No soft humming from the garden, no gentle footsteps in the hallway, no quiet prayers floating from the chapel room. That evening, Roman sat alone in his study, a glass of scotch untouched beside him. He pulled out an old newspaper from his desk drawer, the yellowed article about the convent fire. His eyes traced the familiar words. "Local businessman rescues child from flames." The photo showed him much younger, carrying a small bundle wrapped in his suit jacket. He hadn't known then that the child would grow up to become Leah, that she would return to him like a boomerang of grace, bringing light back into his darkness. "Leah," he whispered to the empty room, finally allowing himself to acknowledge how much her presence had changed him. The name hung in the air like a prayer, like a truth he'd been avoiding since the night she appeared on his doorstep. Outside his window, the setting sun painted the clouds in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere up the coast, Leah would be watching the same sunset, perhaps praying for him as she always did. The thought brought both comfort and an ache he couldn't quite explain. Mrs. Daly appeared at his door with dinner, but he waved her away. How strange that after 20 years of cultivated solitude, just a few months of Leah's presence had made loneliness feel foreign again. He picked up the newspaper one more time, touching the old photograph gently. The house creaked and settled around him as night fell, each familiar sound now underscoring an absence. Roman sat in his leather chair, surrounded by success and wealth, yet feeling the weight of emptiness more keenly than he had in years. In the quiet, he finally admitted to himself that Leah had become more than just an assistant or a link to his past. She had become the light in his darkness, a beacon of hope he hadn't known he was searching for. Leah sat at the cottage's weathered writing desk, the afternoon sun warming the paper beneath her hand. The sound of waves provided a gentle rhythm to her thoughts as she began another letter she knew she'd never send. "Dear Roman," she wrote, her handwriting flowing across the cream-colored page. "Today the sunrise reminded me of that morning you first let me stay. How strange that fear can turn to gratitude, and gratitude to something deeper." She paused, watching a seagull soar past her window. The cottage was beautiful, a cozy two-bedroom retreat with wide windows and worn wooden floors that creaked like friendly whispers. But even surrounded by such peace, her heart kept pulling her thoughts back to the mansion, back to him. "I want to tell you," she continued writing, "about the way your eyes soften when you talk about the Hope Home project, about how your kindness shows in the smallest ways, the fresh flowers in the study, the way you remember how everyone takes their tea." A knock at the door startled her. Leah quickly tucked the letter into her desk drawer, smoothing her dress as she went to answer. There, holding an armful of greenhouse blooms, stood Roman. "I thought you might miss the gardens," he said, looking almost shy beneath his usual composure. "Roman!" Her surprise and joy rang clear in her voice. "Please, come in." He stepped inside, taking in the cottage's simple beauty. "I hope I'm not disturbing your rest." "Never," she said, accepting the flowers. They were a mix of pale roses and sweet-smelling stock, the same flowers she often arranged in the mansion's study. "These are lovely. Let me find a vase." While she arranged the flowers, Roman moved to the window, hands in his pockets. "Would you like to walk? The beach here is quite remarkable." Minutes later, they made their way down the rocky path to the shore. The tide was going out, leaving wet stones gleaming like jewels. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries carried on the salt breeze. "How are things at the mansion?" Leah asked, carefully picking her way across the rocks. "Quiet," Roman admitted. "Mrs. Daly says the place feels empty without your singing." Leah smiled, touched that he'd noticed her absence. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the waves filling the space between them. "Can I tell you something?" Leah said suddenly, stopping to face the ocean. "Something I've never told anyone?" Roman turned to her, his expression gentle. "Of course." "I've never—" She blushed slightly. "I've never been kissed. The nuns who raised me used to say I was saving myself for my calling. I always thought they meant religious life, but now—" She trailed off, watching the waves. Roman was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft with memory. "Since Catherine died, I haven't loved anyone, hadn't even considered it possible." He picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hands. "I thought that part of me died with her and James." "But it didn't," Leah said gently. "Your heart is still so capable of love. I see it in how you help others, in your kindness to the children at the hospital." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the space between them, a deepening of trust, of understanding. The moment held, tender as a prayer, until a wave crashed particularly close, making them both step back with surprised laughs. Later that evening, back at the mansion, Mrs. Daly cornered Roman in the kitchen. "Well, well," she said, hiding a smile as she dried dishes. "The master is smiling again. I take it your visit to the cottage went well?" Roman tried to look stern, but couldn't quite manage it. "Mrs. Daly, you're impossibly nosy." "Somebody has to be," she retorted cheerfully. "That girl's been good for you. Anyone can see that." Instead of his usual deflection, Roman simply nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "She has." In his study that night, Roman made a decision. He called Leah at the cottage. "I'd like you to become director of the Hope Home project," he said. "Officially. You understand these children better than anyone, and your vision for the center. It's exactly what it needs to be." Leah's joy came clearly through the phone. "Really? Oh, Roman, thank you. When can I start?" "How about tomorrow? Come back to the mansion. We'll celebrate properly." The next evening found them in the formal dining room, where Mrs. Daly had outdone herself with a special dinner. Candles flickered on the table, casting warm light over the fine china and crystal glasses. "To new beginnings," Roman said, raising his glass. Leah lifted hers in return. "To building not just homes, but hearts." The moment felt sacred, filled with possibility and hope. Roman couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so at peace, so... His phone buzzed, breaking the spell. He glanced at the screen and felt his smile fade. The message was simple, but chilling. "She isn't who she says she is." Leah noticed his change in expression. "Is everything all right?" Roman forced a smile, trying to push away the sudden cold fear in his chest. "Just business," he lied, slipping the phone back into his pocket. But the warmth of the moment had shattered, leaving him with questions he was afraid to ask. The candles continued to flicker, casting shadows that seemed darker than before. Across the table, Leah's face glowed with innocent joy, making the message feel even more like a knife to his heart. Could there be truth to those words? Could he have been wrong about her? But looking at her, at the pure goodness that seemed to radiate from her very being, he couldn't bring himself to believe it. Not yet. Not without proof. Still, the message sat like ice in his pocket, an unwelcome reminder that sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. The warning message haunted Roman's thoughts, but each time he looked at Leah's gentle face, his doubts melted away. She moved through his world with such pure intention, such genuine kindness, that suspicion felt almost sacrilegious. The grand ballroom of the Archer Foundation sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegant decorations for their first major charity gala. Hundreds of guests in formal wear mingled, their quiet chatter filling the space. Roman stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Leah greet donors with natural grace. She wore a simple blue evening gown that made her look like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. "She's quite remarkable," Mrs. Daly said, appearing at his side with a knowing smile. "The way she connects with people, it's a gift." Roman nodded, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "She makes everything feel lighter somehow." The evening progressed smoothly until it was time for the entertainment portion. Roman hadn't paid much attention to the program details, trusting Leah's judgment. When she took the stage, his heart skipped a beat. "This hymn," she said softly into the microphone, "was taught to me by the nuns who raised me. I later learned it was a favorite of someone very special to this foundation." The first notes filled the air, and Roman's world stopped. It was Catherine's hymn, the one his wife used to sing in their private chapel. He hadn't heard it in 20 years. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Leah's voice was clear and pure, floating through the ballroom like a prayer. Roman gripped the back of a chair, memories washing over him in waves, Catherine singing to baby James, Catherine's voice rising in their little chapel. Catherine. But this wasn't just memory, this was present, alive, healing. Leah's voice carried not just the notes, but something more: hope, renewal, love. Around the room, he saw people dabbing at their eyes, moved by the simple beauty of her song. When the last note faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the applause began. Roman found himself moving towards the terrace doors, needing air, needing space to contain the emotions threatening to overflow. The night air was cool, and strings of fairy lights twinkled overhead like earthbound stars. He heard soft footsteps behind him. "Roman." Leah's voice was tentative. "I'm sorry if the song upset you. I should have asked first." He turned to face her, and the sight of her concern-filled eyes undid him completely. "No," he said hoarsely. "No, it was perfect. You're perfect." She stepped closer, the fairy lights casting a gentle glow on her face. "I'm far from perfect," she whispered. "You've brought me back to life," Roman said, the words coming straight from his heart. "These past months, watching you love others so freely, seeing the world through your eyes, I've come alive again, and I never want to go back to the darkness." Tears sparkled in Leah's eyes. "Then let me stay until life itself ends." The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Roman reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the small box he'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. Now he knew. This was it. "Leah Cruz," he said softly, going down on one knee. "Will you marry me?" She gasped, hands flying to her mouth as he opened the box, revealing a vintage ring with a delicate sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was Catherine's mother's," he explained. "She would have wanted you to have it." Tears spilled down Leah's cheeks as she trembled with both joy and what looked like fear. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Roman slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her close. Above them, the fairy lights swayed gently in the breeze, blessing their embrace with scattered light and shadow. They planned the wedding quickly, wanting something small and meaningful. The seaside chapel near his estate was perfect, intimate enough for close friends, grand enough to honor the occasion. Leah threw herself into the simple preparations with characteristic joy, while Roman found himself smiling more than he had in decades. But their bubble of happiness burst the very next morning. Roman was in his study when Mrs. Daly burst in, clutching a handful of newspapers. "Sir, you need to see these." The headlines screamed from every front page. "Billionaire to marry young refugee assistant. Scandal rocks Archer Foundation. Gold digger or genuine love. Archer's shocking engagement. From charity case to bride, the mysterious Leah Cruz." His hands shook as he read the articles. They painted Leah as a calculating opportunist, questioning her background, her motives, even her identity. Several board members were quoted expressing grave concerns about the foundation's future. His phone began ringing incessantly. Board members demanded emergency meetings. The press wanted statements. His lawyers called with urgent warnings about potential damage to the foundation's reputation. Roman sat heavily in his chair, the newspapers spread before him like accusations. The warning message from the night before suddenly felt prophetic. For the first time since Leah had entered his life, real doubt crept into his heart. What did he really know about her? Yes, she was the girl he'd saved from the fire. But what about the years between then and now? How had she really found him? Why had she really come? The sound of Leah humming drifted in from the garden, where she was probably tending to the roses she'd helped bring back to life. The simple sound twisted in his chest like a knife. He loved her. God, how he loved her. But was love enough when his entire legacy hung in the balance? His phone buzzed again. Another board member demanding answers he wasn't sure he had. Roman stared out the window at the garden, at the woman who had brought color back into his world, and felt his faith in her begin to tremble. The morning after the tabloid explosion brought no relief. Under a slate-grey sky, Roman's study filled with the low murmur of urgent voices. His lawyer, James Mitchell, spread documents across the polished desk with grave precision. "Mr. Archer, these records raise serious concerns," Mitchell said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "The birth certificate Leah Cruz provided to obtain her Social Security card shows irregularities. The paper stock, the watermarks, they don't match state records from that period." Roman's fingers pressed against his temples. "What exactly are you saying?" "We believe the document was forged, sir. Possibly 20 years ago when she first entered the system after the fire." Mitchell's voice was carefully neutral. "But there's more." The lawyer pulled out a sealed envelope, handling it like it might burn his fingers. "We conducted a DNA analysis using samples from the hospital records after the fire. The results—" He paused, swallowing hard. "They indicate a 99.8% probability that Leah Cruz is the biological daughter of your late brother, Thomas Archer." The words hit Roman like physical blows. His brother, Thomas, wild, reckless Thomas, who disappeared in South America 25 years ago. The brother whose death had left so many questions unanswered. "That's impossible," Roman whispered. But even as he spoke, memories flickered through his mind. Thomas's last visit, his strange behavior, the way he'd asked about orphanages in the area. Had he known about a child? Had he been trying to find her? "Sir," Mitchell continued gently, "if these findings are accurate, it would make Ms. Cruz your niece. The implications for your engagement—" "Stop." Roman stood abruptly, turning to face the window. Below, he could see Leah in the garden, kneeling among the roses she'd brought back to life. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair caught by the wind. How many times had he watched her there, feeling his heart heal with every smile she gave him? "Bring her in," he said hoarsely. "She deserves to hear this herself." Minutes later, Leah entered the study, her face already lined with worry. She'd seen the lawyer's cars in the driveway, sensed the tension in the house. When Mitchell began explaining the findings, she grew paler with each word. "No," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "No, that's not possible. My parents died in a fire when I was a baby. The nuns told me—" "We have the DNA results here," Mitchell said, sliding the report across the desk. Tears spilled down Leah's cheeks as she stared at the paper. "Roman, please, you have to believe me. I didn't know. I would never—" Roman couldn't look at her. The pain in her voice matched the agony in his chest. "Did you forge the birth certificate, Leah?" She hesitated, and his heart cracked. "The nuns helped me. After the fire I had nothing, no papers, no identity. They only wanted to help me have a normal life. But I swear I never knew about your brother. Please, Roman, please believe me." Finally, he turned to face her. Her eyes, those honest, loving eyes that had brought him back to life, were swimming with tears. Part of him wanted to gather her in his arms, to say none of it mattered, but the evidence lay between them like a wall. "I need time," he said quietly. "Until we can verify the truth, until we know exactly who you are, you should go." Leah's sob caught in her throat. "Where?" "The seaside cottage," he decided. "You'll be comfortable there, and safe. Mrs. Daly can bring you anything you need." "I don't need things," Leah whispered. "I need you to believe in me." But Roman had already turned away, his shoulders rigid with pain. "Mitchell will drive you." The next hour passed in a blur of quiet grief. Roman remained in his study while Leah packed her small suitcase, the same one she'd arrived with so many months ago. He heard her footsteps in the hallway, pausing at the chapel room where she'd spent so many hours in prayer. Heard her soft goodbye to Mrs. Daly, who was crying openly. Only when Mitchell's car pulled away did Roman move to the balcony. From there, he watched Leah walk down the long driveway, her blue dress rippling in the wind. She turned once, looking up at him, and even from that distance, he felt the weight of her gaze. Then she was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt like a physical presence. The house seemed to mourn her absence. Every room held memories, her laugh echoing through the halls, her voice raised in hymns, her gentle presence making the massive estate feel like a home again. Roman wandered through the empty spaces like a ghost, finally ending up in his son's old room. The violin lay in its case where Leah had carefully placed it after her last practice. He lifted it with trembling hands, remembering the first time he'd heard her play. The melody had drifted through the house like a healing spell, drawing him from his dark thoughts to stand in the doorway, watching her sway with the music. Now, as evening fell, he carried the violin to his office. Outside, clouds gathered thick and dark, a storm brewing over the ocean. The same kind of storm that had brought her to his door that first night, rain-soaked and faithful, carrying a love that had sparked his heart back to life. Thunder rolled across the water as Roman sat in his leather chair, cradling the violin. Wind rattled the windows, and rain began to fall, first in scattered drops, then in sheets that blurred the world beyond the glass. The storm outside matched the one in his heart, where love and doubt battled like opposing winds. He ran his fingers over the violin's strings, producing a discordant whisper that seemed to ask, what if the DNA was wrong? What if there was more to the story? What if he was letting fear destroy the greatest gift he'd ever received? But the documents on his desk offered their cold certainty, and the rain continued to fall, drowning out the whispers of hope with its relentless rhythm. Days melted into each other like watercolors in the rain. Roman Archer's vast estate became a fortress of solitude, its gates firmly closed against the world outside. The grand rooms that had recently echoed with Leah's songs now held only silence and shadows. Roman spent his mornings staring at his untouched coffee, watching the steam rise and fade, much like the hope that had briefly brightened his life. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from the board, reporters, and concerned associates, but he let them all go to voicemail. Mrs. Daly would bring him meals he barely touched, her worried eyes following him as he paced the long hallways like a caged lion. The Hope Home project, once a beacon of promise, stood abandoned. Construction equipment gathered dust behind chain-link fences, and the architectural plans lay forgotten on his desk. Every time he passed the blueprints, he saw Leah's neat handwriting in the margins, little notes about playground placement and sunny reading nooks. Each glimpse was like a knife to his heart. "Sir," Mrs. Daly said one grey morning, her voice gentle but firm. "You can't go on like this." Roman looked up from his desk, where he'd been pretending to review documents. "I'm fine, Margaret." "You haven't been fine since—" "She left." Mrs. Daly stepped closer, clutching something in her hands. "And neither has she." His head snapped up. "You've spoken to her?" "No." Mrs. Daly hesitated, then placed a cream-colored envelope on his desk. "She left this with me before she went away. Asked me to give it to you when I thought the time was right." Roman stared at the envelope, as if it might burst into flames. Leah's elegant handwriting spelled out his name on the front. Just Roman, not Mr. Archer or any formal title. Just the simple intimacy of his first name, written by the hand that had touched his soul. I'll leave you to it," Mrs. Daly said softly, closing the door behind her. For a long time, Roman just sat there, looking at the envelope. Outside, seagulls wheeled and cried, their mournful calls matching his mood. Finally, with trembling fingers, he broke the seal. The letter was written on simple stationery, the kind Leah had kept in her desk in the study. Her words flowed across the page like a gentle stream. "Dearest Roman, by the time you read this, I'll be gone from your home, though never from your heart. I want to thank you for teaching me that love doesn't need blood to be real. The family we built here, you, me, Mrs. Daly, and all the children we hoped to help, was more genuine than any DNA test could measure. I understand why you had to send me away. Trust, once broken, is like a delicate vase. The cracks remain visible even after it's mended. But please know that every word I spoke to you, every promise I made, came from the deepest truth of my soul. I've taken a position at St. Catherine's Mission Hospital in Boston. The work is humble, but it lets me continue what we started, helping children find hope in darkness. Every day I pray for you, for your peace, and for the truth to light its own way forward. Remember what you told me that night by the sea? That sometimes God sends angels disguised as strangers? I still believe that's true. And I believe that someday, when all shadows clear, you'll understand that love's true lineage isn't written in blood tests, but in the heart's unwavering faith, with eternal gratitude and love. Leah. Roman read the letter 7 times until the words blurred before his eyes. Each reading revealed new layers of Leah's gentle wisdom, her unwavering faith, her pure love. The paper grew damp with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. He reached for his phone, then stopped. What would he say? How could he bridge the chasm that doubt had carved between them? Instead, he called his lawyer, Mitchell. "I need you to investigate something," Roman said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "The DNA report. I want to know everything about where it came from, who ordered it, who processed it." "Sir." Mitchell sounded surprised. "I thought we'd closed that matter." "Nothing's closed until I say it is." Roman's voice gained strength. "And get me everything you can on Victor Grant's recent activities." "Victor Grant? Your former protégé?" "The same." Roman's jaw tightened as pieces began falling into place. "He's always wanted control of the Foundation. He'd do anything to discredit me, including destroying an innocent woman's reputation." Mitchell's typing could be heard over the phone. "I'll start digging right away, sir. But may I ask what changed your mind?" Roman looked down at Leah's letter, at the love and truth flowing from every word. "Let's just say someone reminded me that real truth doesn't hide behind false evidence." Over the next few days, Roman emerged from his shell of isolation. He reopened his office, started returning calls, and most importantly, ordered a complete review of the Hope Home project. Mrs. Daly noticed the change immediately, the light returning to his eyes, the purpose in his step. "I'm having sandwiches delivered to your study," she announced one afternoon, a knowing smile on her face. "You've got that look that says you won't be stopping for dinner." Roman managed a small smile. "Thank you, Margaret. And thank you for knowing when to give me her letter." Mrs. Daly patted his arm. "Love finds its own timing, Mr. Archer. Always has, always will." Mitchell's investigation moved quickly. Each day brought new revelations, inconsistencies in the DNA lab's procedures, mysterious payments from offshore accounts, and a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight to Victor Grant's door. "He's been planning this for months," Mitchell reported, spreading documents across Roman's desk. "The forged birth certificate claims, the DNA test, it was all orchestrated to destroy your reputation and take control of the Foundation." Roman stood at his window, watching waves crash against the rocky shore. And I played right into his hands. I let him use my own fears against me. We're gathering enough evidence to clear Ms. Cruz's name completely, Mitchell assured him. The real question is, what do you want to do about Grant? Roman turned, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile crossed his face. Justice has its own timing, Mitchell. First, we need to right the wrong done to an innocent heart. Everything else can wait. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of hope, Roman stood in the chapel room where Leah had spent so many hours in prayer. The space still held echoes of her presence, the small cushion where she knelt, the Bible with her delicate bookmarks, the peace that seemed to radiate from the very walls. He picked up the Bible, and it fell open to a page she had marked. A verse was underlined in her careful hand. Love never fails. Outside, the first stars began to appear, twinkling like distant promises. Somewhere in Boston, in a humble mission hospital, Leah was probably tending to children, sharing her light with those who needed it most. Soon, very soon, he would find a way to bring that light home where it belonged. But first, there was work to be done. Truth to be uncovered. Justice to be served. And most importantly, faith to be restored. Not just in love, but in the power of grace to overcome all obstacles. Roman closed the Bible gently and walked to his study. On his desk, Leah's letter lay open beside Mitchell's investigation files. Two paths converging toward one truth. He picked up his phone and began to dial. The mission hospital in Boston hummed with quiet activity as Leah moved from bed to bed, adjusting blankets and offering comfort to sick children. The winter sun had long since set, casting the ward in soft shadows, broken only by the gentle glow of night lights. She paused to brush back the hair of a sleeping 6-year-old girl, remembering how she herself had once been a child in need of care. "Miss Cruz," whispered Tommy, a thin boy with bright eyes despite his illness. "Will you tell us another story about the man who saves people?" Leah smiled softly, perching on the edge of his bed. "Which one would you like to hear?" "The one about the fire." Several young voices chimed in quietly. She glanced at the worn photograph she kept in her pocket, a newspaper clipping showing Roman 20 years younger, his face stern but his eyes kind. "Well, once there was a man with a heart so big, he ran into a burning building to save a little girl he didn't even know." Later that night, in her tiny room at the nurse's quarters, Leah knelt beside her narrow bed. Her rosary beads clicked softly as she moved them through her fingers, each prayer carrying Roman's name to heaven. The room was sparse, just a bed, a small desk, and a chair. But the window offered a view of the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. "Lord," she whispered, "protect him, guide him to the truth, and if it be your will." She touched the simple cross at her throat. "Let me see him again, just once more." The phone's sharp ring cut through her prayers like a knife through silk. Her heart jumped. Calls this late rarely brought good news. With trembling fingers she answered, "Is this Leah Cruz?" A woman's familiar voice spoke urgently. "Mrs. Daly." Leah gripped the phone tighter. "What's wrong?" "It's Mr. Archer." The housekeeper's voice cracked. "He's had a heart attack during a board meeting about the foundation. They've taken him to Central Maine Medical." The world seemed to tilt beneath Leah's feet. How bad?" "The doctors aren't sure. He's unconscious. Before they took him away, he—" Mrs. Daly's voice wavered. "He whispered your name." Leah was already moving, pulling on her warmest coat. "I'm coming. Tell him I'm coming." She packed nothing. There was nothing to pack. Just her rosary, slipped into her pocket, and the photograph of Roman she always carried. The night nurse understood immediately when Leah explained, covering her shift without question. The last train to Maine was leaving in 20 minutes. Leah ran through the snowy streets, her breath coming in white puffs in the freezing air. She barely made it, sliding into a seat as the train pulled away from the station. The few other passengers dozed or read, unaware of the prayers pouring silently from her heart. Through the window, she watched the city lights fade into darkness, replaced by snow-covered fields glowing faintly under a clouded moon. The rhythm of the train became a heartbeat, steady and strong, the way Roman's heart needed to be. "You saved me once," she whispered to his photograph. "You pulled me from the flames and gave me life. Now it's my turn." The journey seemed endless. Every stop felt like an eternity. The snow fell heavier as they moved north, blanketing the world in white silence. Leah pressed her forehead against the cold window, remembering the warmth of Roman's home, the sound of his laugh when she finally broke through his defenses, the way his eyes softened when she played his son's violin. At last, the train arrived in Portland. Leah caught a taxi immediately, the driver carefully navigating the snow-covered roads to the hospital. The building rose before them like a lighthouse in a storm, its windows glowing against the dark sky. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Leah approached the nurse's station. "Roman Archer," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm family." The nurse looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. Everyone knew the story of the billionaire and the young woman who'd disappeared. But something in Leah's face must have touched her, because she nodded. "Room 315. But visiting hours are... Please," Leah said softly. "He saved my life once. Let me try to save his." The nurse hesitated, then handed her a visitor's badge. 10 minutes. The elevator ride to the third floor felt like ascending to heaven. Leah's prayers never ceased, her lips moving silently as she clutched her rosary. The corridor stretched before her, each step bringing her closer to the man who had captured her heart with his hidden kindness and buried pain. Room 315. The door was partially open, soft beeping sounds emerging from within. Leah paused, gathering her strength, then stepped inside. Roman lay still and pale against the white sheets, monitors tracking his heartbeat in steady green lines. Grey touched his temples, and lines of pain marked his face even in unconsciousness. Various tubes and wires connected him to machines that kept careful watch over his life. Leah moved to his bedside like a ghost, her feet making no sound on the polished floor. She took his hand, the strong hand that had once pulled her from death, and held it between both of hers. His skin felt cool. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You saved me once, now let me save you." She pressed his hand to her cheek. "Come back to me, Roman. There's so much left for us to do. So many children waiting for the home we promised to build. So much love left to share." She began to pray, her voice barely, a whisper in the quiet room. The familiar words of faith flowed from her heart, carrying all her love and hope with them. As she prayed, she watched the monitors carefully, hoping for any sign that he heard her. The night nurse paused in the doorway, checking the monitors. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she noted the readings. "His pulse is getting stronger," she said softly, not wanting to interrupt Leah's prayers. "Keep talking to him. Sometimes they can hear us, even when they're unconscious." Leah nodded, never letting go of Roman's hand. She began to hum softly, the same hymn she'd sung at the gala, the one that had moved him to tears because it reminded him of his wife. In the quiet hospital room, her voice carried peace and promise, a thread of gold in the darkness. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, each flake a wish for healing, each moment a prayer for love to triumph over fear and truth to overcome lies. Leah settled into the chair beside Roman's bed, still holding his hand, still praying. She would stay as long as they let her, guarding his sleep, calling him back to life with the same devotion that had brought her to his door that stormy night so long ago. "I believe in miracles," she whispered to him. "I believe in second chances, and third chances, and however many chances it takes for love to win." She touched the cross at her throat. "You taught me that when you saved me. Now it's my turn to believe enough for both of us." The monitors beeped steadily, marking time in the quiet room. Leah's prayers continued, a constant stream of hope in the winter night as she waited for Roman to find his way back to her. Dawn painted the hospital windows with pale winter light. The corridors were quiet except for the soft squeak of nurses' shoes and the distant murmur of early morning rounds. Leah had dozed off in the chair beside Roman's bed, her hand still holding his, when rapid footsteps echoed down the hall. The door burst open, making Leah jump. Roman's lawyer, Michael Thompson, stood there breathing heavily, his suit wrinkled and his tie askew. Snow dusted his shoulders, and he clutched a thick manila envelope. "Ms. Cruz," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. "We have it. We have everything." Leah's heart leaped, but she kept her voice low for Roman's sake. "What do you mean?" Thompson crossed to her side, pulling documents from the envelope with trembling hands. "The DNA results, they were completely fabricated. We have proof that Victor Grant bribed the laboratory technician. He planned everything, trying to destroy Roman's reputation so he could take control of the company during the chaos." Leah's free hand flew to her throat, touching her cross. "Dear God," she whispered. "There's more," Thompson continued, spreading papers across the small bedside table. "Grant's been embezzling funds for years, small amounts that added up to millions. He used that money to pay off people, including reporters who spread those terrible stories about you." As they spoke, Roman's estate manager, James Porter, was already delivering the evidence to every major news outlet in Portland. Within hours, the story exploded across social media and news channels. "Breaking news. Billionaire's assistant cleared of all allegations," scrolled across screens throughout the hospital. The morning sun grew stronger, filling the room with crystalline snowlight that made everything seem fresh and new. Leah sat watching Roman's face, hope burning in her chest like a flame. His eyelids flickered. She leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. "Roman!" Slowly, like a man emerging from deep water, Roman opened his eyes. They found Leah immediately, focusing on her face with growing awareness. His lips moved, and she had to lean close to hear his whisper. "You came back." Tears spilled down Leah's cheeks as she squeezed his hand. "I never left," she answered softly. "Not in my heart." Roman's eyes filled with tears of his own. "Leah, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted." "Shh," she soothed, touching his cheek. "It's all right now. Everything's been proven. Victor Grant, he tried to destroy us both, but truth won out, just like I knew it would." Thompson stepped forward, explaining everything in gentle terms while Roman listened intently. With each revelation, the tension in Roman's face eased, replaced by understanding and relief. "I've been such a fool," Roman said when Thompson finished. His voice was stronger now. "I let fear poison my faith. Can you forgive me?" Leah's smile was like sunrise. "There's nothing to forgive. Love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Throughout the day, nurses came and went, checking Roman's vital signs and smiling at the reunion playing out in room 315. As evening approached, bringing early winter darkness and the sparkle of snow against the windows, Roman asked the nurse to help him sit up. "Leah," he said, his voice serious but tender. He took her hand in both of his. I asked you once before, but I was holding part of my heart back. Now I'm asking with everything I am." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Will you still marry me?" Leah's tears fell freely as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." A nurse standing in the doorway couldn't contain her joy and let out a small cheer. The sound carried down the hallway, and soon other staff members gathered at the door, breaking into spontaneous applause. The celebration spread through the hospital wing, with nurses, doctors, and even other patients sharing in the moment of pure joy. Roman pulled Leah close, kissing her forehead. "I promise you," he murmured, "from this day forward, my faith will be as strong as yours." Leah nestled against him carefully, mindful of the monitors still attached to his chest. "Faith brought me to your door that night," she said. "Love kept me there, and truth brought us back, together." The hospital staff continued their quiet celebration in the hallway, sharing the story of the billionaire and the angel who saved him. Twice. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, each flake catching the last light of day, turning the world into a shower of diamonds. The winter morning dawned clear and bright, with sunlight sparkling off fresh snow as guests made their way up the winding path to the clifftop chapel. The small stone building stood like a sentinel against the steel-blue horizon, its weathered walls warmed by strings of white lights and evergreen garlands. Inside, candlelight danced across wooden pews filled with a mix of well-wishers, orphanage staff, townspeople, and children from the Hope Home, their faces bright with excitement. Mrs. Daly dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Brother Samuel sat quietly in the front row, his weathered face peaceful. The old chapel doors opened, letting in a shaft of winter sunlight. Leah appeared, radiant in a simple cream-colored dress that seemed to glow in the natural light. Her dark hair was crowned with baby's breath, and her veil floated behind her, held carefully by two little girls from the Hope Home choir, Emma and Sarah, who took their task very seriously. Roman waited at the altar, his grey eyes bright with unshed tears as he watched his bride approach. The transformation in him was clear to everyone who knew him. Gone was the stern, isolated man who had hidden from life behind his wealth. In his place stood someone renewed, someone who had learned to trust in love again. When they joined hands before the minister, the sunlight through the stained glass windows painted them in soft colours. Their vows were simple but profound, spoken with voices that carried clearly through the hushed chapel. At the final blessing, Roman lifted Leah's hand to his heart. "I saved a child once," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but God sent her back to save me." The truth of those words rang through the chapel, bringing tears to many eyes. After the ceremony, the entire wedding party made their way to the newly reopened Hope Home. The building stood proud and welcoming, its fresh paint gleaming in the winter light. Inside, children's artwork decorated the walls, and the sound of laughter echoed through bright hallways. In the main office, Leah gathered everyone close. "We have an announcement," she said, beaming. "Roman and I have decided to adopt two very special boys." She gestured to Gabriel and Daniel, brothers who had survived the same fire that had once brought Leah and Roman together. The boys stepped forward shyly, Gabriel clutching his beloved violin, while Daniel held protectively to his younger brother's hand. Roman's hands trembled as he signed the adoption papers, tears falling freely onto the documents. These weren't tears of sorrow, but of joy, of a circle completing itself, of hope reborn, of faith rewarded. As he finished signing, both boys rushed forward to embrace him and Leah, completing their new family in front of all their witnesses. Gentle spring breezes carried the scent of lilacs across the main coastline, mingling with the salty air. Roman sat in his favorite wicker chair on the wraparound porch, a half-read book forgotten in his lap. His attention was completely captured by the scene before him on the beach. Leah knelt in the sand, her sundress billowing in the wind as she helped 8-year-old Gabriel pack wet sand into a tower. 10-year-old Daniel ran back and forth from the water's edge, bringing buckets of water to strengthen their creation. Their laughter drifted up to the house, carried on the wind like music. "Watch this, Mom," Daniel called out, carefully adding a shell to the highest turret. The way the word "Mom" fell so naturally from his lips made Roman's heart swell. It had taken time, but both boys now used it without hesitation. Gabriel sat back on his heels, studying their castle with an artist's eye. "It needs a flag," he declared, and began searching the beach for the perfect piece of driftwood. Leah looked up then, catching Roman's eye. Her smile was radiant, full of joy and peace. She waved to him, her laugh mixing with the sound of the waves, and something in Roman's chest tightened with gratitude. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered aloud, the words carrying more weight than any prayer he'd ever spoken. "Thank you for second chances." 20 years of darkness had been washed away by love that had come to his door on a stormy night. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Roman stood, leaving his book behind, and made his way down the wooden steps to the beach. The sand was still warm beneath his feet as he approached his family. Leah reached for his hand as he drew near, her fingers intertwining with his naturally, perfectly. Together they stood at the water's edge with their sons, letting the gentle waves wash over their feet. The last light of day caught their reflections in the wet sand. 4 figures merged into one family. "You gave me life, Roman," Leah whispered, her voice soft but clear above the sound of the waves. "Now we give it back to the world." Their shared laughter rose into the evening air as Daniel splashed his brother playfully, and Gabriel retaliated with a handful of wet sand. The tide carried the sound out to sea, a joyful testament to love's power to heal and rebuild. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.